She sat across from the camera, completely still. No rehearsed smile, no polished answer waiting on her lips. Just silence, the kind that settles into a room and refuses to leave. And in that silence, before she even opened her mouth, something told you that what was coming had been held back for a very long time. Dylan Dreyer has spent years being the steady one, the warm one. The woman millions of Americans woke up to every morning, coffee in hand, trusting that her calm presence meant the world behind the cameras was just as settled. She was careful, measured. And for a long time, that careful measuring kept certain things from ever reaching the surface. But something finally gave way. At 44, after years of navigating a subject that had quietly followed her through corridors and headlines and unspoken moments, Dylan spoke. And what she said wasn't loud. It wasn't sharp or rehearsed or designed to wound. It came the way truth almost always comes, slowly, unexpectedly, and with a weight that makes everything around it go quiet. The name she mentioned. The relationship she described. The words she chose and the ones she deliberately didn't. All of it pointed towards something that people had been sensing for years without ever having it confirmed. Savannah Guthrie, Two Women. One of the most watched morning programs in American television history. Years of shared desks, shared headlines, shared laughter on camera, and a shared silence about the things that actually mattered. What Dylan said in that moment wasn't what anyone expected. And the reaction from viewers, from industry insiders, from people who believed they already understood the full picture, made it impossible to look away. Something had cracked open. And once something like that opens, it doesn't close again. There is a version of morning television that most of us accept completely without ever questioning it. The anchors are close. They finish each other's sentences. They celebrate birthdays together on air and share personal news the way old friends do. And the whole thing feels so natural, so genuine, that you never stop to wonder how much of it is real and how much of it is simply very good television. NBC's Today Show has built its entire identity on that feeling, on warmth, on the appearance of a family gathered every morning to welcome you into your day. And for well over a decade, Dylan Dreyer has been one of the most essential threads in that fabric. She came in as the meteorologist. Dependable, grounded, the one who told you whether the week ahead would be kind or punishing. But over time, she became something harder to define and far more valuable, a presence. Someone viewers genuinely connected with, not because of her title, but because of something she carried that the camera couldn't manufacture. She grew up in New Jersey. Studied meteorology with the kind of focused quiet that doesn't announce itself. Worked her way through local stations across the country before landing at NBC. She married Brian Fisher, a cameraman she met within the building. They built a life together. They had children together. And when the road to those children turned painful, when miscarriage and fertility struggles became part of her story, she talked about it. Openly, honestly. At a time when women in her position almost never did. That honesty bought her something no network strategy could. Real, lasting trust from people who felt genuinely seen by her. Savannah Guthrie arrived in a different way entirely. She came in like something that changes the shape of a room just by entering it. Sharp, Harvard-educated, with a legal mind tucked inside a presence that television cameras responded to immediately. She joined Today in 2012, and within a short time had become the gravitational center of the program in ways that were difficult to ignore. The major interviews, the high-stakes moments. The segments that generated conversation for days afterward. The network leaned toward her naturally, the way institutions lean toward whoever draws the most light. For years, the two women shared that desk. They laughed together. They supported each other warmly, publicly, without visible friction. To anyone watching, it looked like genuine friendship. Uncomplicated, easy, solid. But the outside of anything is always the last place the truth decides to live. People who spend enough years inside television stop being surprised by the gap between what's performed and what's real. The Today Show, for all the careful warmth it broadcasts, has never been fully protected from the pressures that come with that level of visibility. The stakes, the competition. The quiet hierarchies that form when cameras aren't rolling. Dylan never said much about any of it. She smiled, she showed up. She delivered excellent work with a consistency that made it easy to take her for granted in the most human of ways, present without threatening, capable without demanding. But at 44, something in her shifted. A conversation happened, a moment opened up in a direction she may not have fully planned for. And what came out of her mouth in that moment quietly reframed everything that viewers thought they understood about these two women and the world they had been sharing. For the first several years of Dylan's time at Today, the structure around her felt stable. She had built a lane that suited her, whether feature segments, human interest stories that gave her warmth a natural place to land. She wasn't positioned as competition for anyone, and that created a particular kind of professional peace. You can breathe more easily when no one is measuring you against the person at the top. And she used that space with care. She built a following that felt genuinely loyal because it was built on something genuine. People trusted Dylan the way you trust someone who tells you a difficult truth, because they believe you deserve it. Within the building, according to those familiar with the show's internal dynamics, she was known as someone who didn't manufacture conflict. She arrived prepared. She didn't push for things she hadn't been offered. She collaborated without condition. In an environment full of enormous egos and enormous stakes, those qualities made her valuable, and, in the quiet way these things work, also made her easier to overlook. Because the people who never cause trouble are so often the people whose trouble goes unaddressed the longest. During this same period, Savannah was moving in a different direction entirely. Her profile was rising in ways that became increasingly hard to look past. The interviews she secured were the ones people were still discussing days later. The segments she anchored pulled the most attention. Network investment followed visibility, and visibility followed Savannah with something close to inevitability. A gravitational pull formed around her that gradually restructured everything nearby. This isn't unusual in television. Hierarchies form, stars rise, resources follow. But what that process quietly does to the people living inside it, especially the ones performing warmth and connection for a national audience every single morning, is something that almost never gets spoken about with any honesty. Dylan kept showing up. She kept delivering. She kept whatever was accumulating beneath the surface exactly where it was beneath the surface. That quiet lasted long enough for most people to assume there was nothing underneath it at all. They were wrong. There are moments in any long professional relationship when something shifts in a way that doesn't announce itself. No confrontation, no dramatic rupture. Just the slow accumulation of small things that individually carry no weight, but together become impossible to ignore. People with knowledge of the Today Show's internal environment have described, across various reports over the years, a culture where hierarchy was experienced more than it was stated. Where certain anchors occupied certain spaces in certain ways. Where decisions about who led, who was consulted, who was informed only after the fact, reflected a structure that ran deeper than any production schedule. According to those reports, Dylan was rarely the first call, and for a time she appeared to have reached a kind of peace with that. Her lane was defined, she knew its edges. She didn't waste energy pressing against them, but then came shifts that were harder to absorb quietly. Reports circulating in entertainment and media circles over the years pointed to building tensions within the show, not solely between individuals, but within the architecture of the program itself. Contracts were renegotiated, roles were quietly adjusted. The show's identity was being reshaped in real time, and those changes didn't land on everyone equally. Dylan experienced adjustments to her role that were visible enough for regular viewers to notice, and according to those with knowledge of the situation, felt acutely by Dylan herself. Segments she had owned moved. Her presence in certain formats became less frequent. Each change was small on its own. But someone living inside that environment doesn't experience changes as isolated events. They experience them as a pattern, and the pattern said something clearly, even if no one said it out loud. Savannah, through all of it, remained centered, remained elevated, remained the North Star the show continued to orbit. That contrast, held in place over years, doesn't require a single word to communicate. It exists in the daily reality of walking into a building and understanding exactly where you stand without anyone needing to tell you. Dylan understood. And for a long time, she chose to keep going anyway. What people on the outside rarely appreciate is the actual cost of sustained silence. It isn't passive. It isn't simply the absence of speech. It is work, constant, exhausting, invisible work. It requires taking what you actually feel and redirecting it, again and again, towards something that won't create problems, won't invite scrutiny, won't cost you the position you've spent years building. Dylan had been doing that work quietly for a very long time. Questions had been raised in various media reports about the texture of her relationship with Savannah, not about open conflict, but about distance. The kind of professional distance that doesn't come from an argument, but from a structure that has gradually sorted two people into different worlds. One world where you are centered, protected, and elevated. Another where you are valued genuinely, but always within a boundary that never quite moves. For someone as perceptive as Dylan, and people who have worked alongside her consistently describe her in those terms, that kind of dynamic would not pass unnoticed. It would simply pass unspoken. Because speaking it out loud raises questions with no comfortable answers. What would it change? What would it cost? The calculation that women in high-visibility environments make constantly, often in seconds, often without fully realizing they're making it at all. You hold the truth up against the consequences. And the consequences, more often than not, outweigh the relief. According to sources familiar with the show's internal culture, there were stretches of time when the distance between Dylan's public performance and her private experience was significant, where the warmth she delivered to camera each morning was partly real and partly constructed, the way all sustained performance eventually becomes, where she was carrying more than anything she allowed to show. That kind of weight accumulates, and at some point, the question stops being whether it will find a way out and becomes simply when. For Dylan, the answer didn't arrive as a confrontation or a crisis. It arrived, according to reports, in a moment when her guard was lower than usual. A conversation that moved in a direction she perhaps hadn't anticipated. And what came out of her felt less like something she had planned and more like something that had simply been waiting long enough. She spoke about Savannah. About what their relationship had actually looked like across all those years, behind the warmth that television projected. She didn't reach for cruel language. She didn't level accusations. But what she described was notably more complicated than the easy friendship the show had always asked audiences to believe in. She spoke, according to accounts of the conversation, about moments of feeling passed over, about decisions that shaped her professional life being made without her voice being part of them, about the particular difficulty of performing closeness on camera with someone whose relationship to you off camera is something quite different. She spoke carefully, deliberately, with the restraint of someone who had rehearsed this in her own mind many times and was finally letting some of it out. The reaction was immediate and telling. People who encountered the account described a particular feeling, not shock exactly, but recognition. The sense of finally having words placed around something they had long perceived but never been able to confirm. Former colleagues responded. Viewers who had followed the show with attention responded. Industry observers responded. And the common thread in all of it wasn't the drama of the disclosure, it was the control of it. The way Dylan held herself even in the act of speaking truth. The way she chose precision over devastation. Savannah has not issued any direct public response to what Dylan shared. That silence in its own quiet way says something. What makes this story resist easy resolution is that it refuses to give you a clean narrative. There is no obvious villain here. Savannah Guthrie is, by any professional measure, an exceptional journalist. The interviews she has conducted carry genuine historical weight. Her public moments of personal vulnerability, her own health challenges, her own fears shared openly, earned her a loyalty from audiences that was real and deserved. She didn't build her position at Today through smallness. She built it through talent and an undeniable presence that the industry recognized and rewarded. That is simply true. And Dylan Dreyer is not a diminished figure in this story. She is not someone who stayed silent because she lacked strength. She raised her children while holding a demanding national platform. She was honest about pain at a time when honesty of that kind was genuinely rare in her position. She built something durable and loyal and entirely her own. She is not a victim. She is a person navigating a structure that wasn't designed with her fully in mind, and doing it with more grace than most people would manage. What this story is actually about is that structure. What happens when two capable, complicated women are placed inside a hierarchy that can only fully accommodate one of them at a time? How that structure quietly bends certain things and breaks others. How the sustained performance of closeness and warmth, held in place long enough, eventually develops fractures that no amount of professional discipline can fully conceal. Questions have been raised in the wake of what Dylan shared about what the road ahead looks like. About whether the dynamic she described is something that can genuinely shift, or whether it is simply the fixed reality of the environment she has chosen to remain inside. About what it costs her still, every morning showing up, doing her work with integrity, sharing that desk with someone whose relationship to her is now, at least partially, a matter of public record. No official conclusion has been reached about where things stand between them now. No statement has been released. No resolution has been written, but something real has changed. When a person speaks a truth they have been holding for years, the silence that surrounds them afterward is never the same silence as before. It carries different weight. It means something different. And everyone inside that room, in every sense of the word, already knows it. Dylan Dreyer, at 44, let something go, and in letting it go, she made pretending no longer possible. There is something this story leaves behind that doesn't settle quickly or comfortably. It might be the image of a woman finally exhaling, not loudly, not dramatically, just releasing something she had been carrying through years of early mornings and bright lights and carefully maintained composure. Not in anger, not in bitterness, with the quiet, worn honesty of someone who has decided at last that the cost of holding on is greater than the cost of letting go. We watch morning television the way we watch something we trust completely. We receive its warmth as genuine. We let it into our mornings without examining it too closely, because examining it would require us to ask questions that make the warmth feel less reliable. But behind that warmth is a real workplace, with real power structures and real people who feel the weight of those structures every single day, even when the cameras are pointed at their smiles. Dylan gave years to that warmth. She showed up and delivered it and made it real through genuine effort and genuine care, even on the mornings when what she was actually feeling had no place in the broadcast. She was loyal to an audience that trusted her, loyal to an institution that needed her, loyal even to a version of herself that she had agreed to be on camera, calm, warm, uncomplicated, steady. That kind of sustained loyalty is not a small thing. It is not free. And when someone who has given that much finally allows one honest moment to slip through, not a speech, not a press release, just a moment of real truth spoken to another human being, that means something. What she said about Savannah may or may not reshape anything in practical terms. Their professional lives continue to intersect. The show continues. The cameras come on every morning and the warmth is produced, and most of the people watching receive it exactly as it is offered. But underneath that continuity, something has quietly shifted. A truth was spoken, it found its way into the world. And for the people who have been paying careful attention, not looking for drama, but watching for the real story that lives beneath the polished one, what Dylan said felt less like a revelation and more like a door finally opening on a room that had been sealed for years. The question that lingers longest isn't really about Savannah. It isn't even fully about Dylan. It's about all the mornings in between the truth and the moment it was finally spoken. What those mornings required of her, what they quietly cost. And whether the particular freedom that comes from finally speaking, even gently, even partially, even just once, whether that freedom is worth everything that had to happen before it was possible. Some questions don't resolve, but they deserve to exist. They deserve to be asked out loud. And Dylan Dreyer, at 44, decided she was finally the one to ask them. If something in this story stayed with you, if it touched something you recognize from your own experience, or simply made you think about the gap between what we perform and what we feel, then you already understand why stories like this matter. Not for the names, not for the headlines, but for what they reveal about the quieter, more universal experience of navigating a world that doesn't always make space for the truth. Leave a thought below if something here resonated, and if you believe careful, honest storytelling is worth your time, consider subscribing. There is more to come. And it will always be told with the same care as this.